started on time, right? All right. Thank you guys for joining SDA Seattle for today's presentation. My name is Carrie, and I am the Vice President for SDA Seattle this year. After the presentation, we ask that all chapter members please stay on this GoToMeeting for our chapter business meeting. We'll do a short little break for you, but just stay on this call. We didn't set up a separate link. Everybody else who doesn't want to attend our chapter meeting can drop off, but you're always welcome to stay if you'd like. General housekeeping, we are recording this presentation, and a link to the recording as well as the slide deck will be sent out by me afterwards, so you can come back and take another look at it. We are muting everybody to help keep the audio nice and clear, and your video is optional. It's always nice to see your faces, but we totally understand if you want to eat your lunch, or if your bandwidth suffers with audio or with vision, you got to listen to us. That's the catch. You have to listen. Video is optional. All right. With that, we got 19 out of 20. That is excellent. We are in good shape. So we are pleased today to welcome All Things HR. They are an HR consulting firm here in Washington with lots of seasoned professionals to support your company with flexible programs. We've been working with them recently at my firm and love having them as a resource. Whether you need a little or a lot of HR support, these guys can help you out for sure. Today we have Stacy Glide and Angela Phillips. They will be talking about onboarding procedures and offering suggestions geared around virtual onboarding situations and general onboarding. So they're gonna lead us through a few different ways to handle that situation. And that is all I have there. I am going to turn the presentation mode over to Angela, and you guys can take it away. Well, not if I mute you. Hold on. Okay, there we go. Do you have it, Angela? No?
No, not yet.
Okay. I'll just redo it real quick. Oh, you know what? I kicked her out. Oops. We'll give her a second to come back in. Oh, GoToMeeting.
I guess you're giving the presentation now, Carrie.
Yeah, it's all me, right? No, I just kicked her out. She'll come right back. I'm so sorry.
Did she kick out?
So GoToMeeting, when you try to take presenter mode back from somebody, it doesn't really work like it looks like it's going to work, and it kicks them out of the presentation entirely. Let me pop screens here and send her a real quick email. Oh my goodness, how embarrassing. Yeah, I think she's coming in. Oh, well, in case anybody ever doubted if I make these kinds of mistakes while being recorded, the answer is a big old yes on that one. Angela. All right, get her back. Hang on. There she comes.
There she comes.
I have to owe you a beer or something now. There's got to be. I don't know what the penalty is for kicking out the presenter, but I owe it. All right, there you are.
Wait 1 second. Let me just pull out my PowerPoint.
Sure.
Okay. Can everybody see our PowerPoint presentation?
Looks good to me.
All right. Perfect. Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for the introduction, Carrie. We're very excited to be here today presenting to SDA on some onboarding best practices. We'll tailor it a bit to the remote age and also some general best practices on onboarding in general. Wait 1 second. Again, I'm Angela Phillips, and throughout the presentation, it will be myself and my colleague, Stacy Glide. We are HR consultants at All Things HR, and yes, we do provide all things HR. So at the end of the presentation, we will provide you some information on some of our upcoming free webinars in addition to some of our services. Throughout our presentation, if you have any questions, if you want to kind of put them in the chat feature, and at the very end, we'll save a little bit of time for Q&A. Also, as Carrie mentioned, she'll send this deck out to you, and if you have any questions about it, feel free, to reach out to us even after today. we are HR professionals. We're not employment attorneys. So just our little disclaimers, we're not providing legal advice. We're providing our HR consultation. We're providing compliance pieces with HR and also best practices. So our agenda for today, we are going to start with talking about onboarding. We'll kind of share with you a little bit about the differences between orientation and onboarding and why onboarding is so important. As we know, we want to continue to have great retention, and we also want to save time and money by getting our employees up to speed as soon as possible and make sure that they feel engaged right away. So we'll talk a little bit about the steps involved with onboarding during the hiring process, before the first day, pre-onboarding, and during that first day of orientation and the first week, and then the ongoing process. And then we'll share with you probably throughout the presentation and at the very end some best practices now that we're in a little bit more of that remote age, and some final thoughts to ensure that we are creating a positive onboarding experience for our employees when they start. So I'm going to turn it over right now to Stacy, who's going to share some food for thought.
Okay, thanks, Angela. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I wanted to kick it off with this, this food for thought. New hires tend to decide within 3 months of starting a new job whether or not they will stay with the organization. So that comes out of a number of different types of surveys. It's something that we kind of see as the best practice, and it kind of kicks off this whole idea of what onboarding means. So if you think of onboarding as a process that should take the first 90 days of employment, I think that's a great place to start. And we'll talk a bit about the differences between orientation and onboarding moving forward, and then we'll get into some more details about that. So first, what's the difference between orientation and onboarding? So I think traditionally we think of the orientation process and onboarding as synonymous, and they're not. And so I just wanted to kind of get that out there. When we talk about new hire orientation, we're really just talking about a portion of the onboarding process. And that's where new employees are introduced to and welcomed to the company. Typically, it's that first day. It might be the first couple of days, but typically it's that first day. And the goal is for that new employee to learn about the company and their job responsibilities. It's a time to complete new hire paperwork and review and answer questions about the company, about the HR department, benefits, payroll, and so on. So it's really a lot of housekeeping to make sure that the employee is compliant with their introduction to the company and that they kind of know what things are expected of them. So if you think about the onboarding process and that being a portion of it, the onboarding process is really that strategic process of assimilating new employees with a company, a department, and its culture. Onboarding requires frequent and ongoing communications between the new employee and management well after that first day, that first week, or even that first month of starting a job. So you really like to think of it as that first 90 days. We'll kind of get into some details about what that means. So first of all, I did want to talk a little bit about new hire orientation. What are some best practices? So some of the best practices to think about are in completing that paperwork, what does that look like? What does your paperwork packet look like? And primarily, who's going to be heading up that particular process? So who's the administrative support who's going to be sending it out or sitting down with that person, coordinating all of that, making sure it gets done, reviewing it, and getting it off to the right people. So if you're a large organization, likely you have an HR department that can manage all of that. If you're a smaller organization, it may be you have one HR professional. It may be that you have an office manager that kind of takes on that role, and that's all fine. It's just like pinpointing who that is and giving that person sort of some idea about what is expected of them in order to make that happen. Workstation setup, no matter where you are, orientation day, that first day, we need to make sure that they've got the equipment that they need in order to be successful. So a lot of that is just pre-planning. If you have an IT vendor or if you have an IT on site, it's just making sure that they have enough lead time, and we'll get into some of the details around that. Next would be looking at your company policies. So likely most organizations have an employee handbook. If you don't, you do at least have some policies that you're going to want to review with that new person that first day. That gives them some guidelines in what's expected. You may decide as an organization that you want to really pinpoint a few key policies, such as the ones that provide a lot of protection for you as an employer, like, yes, we have an anti-discrimination policy, we don't allow violence on site, we have zero tolerance for violence, for drugs and alcohol on the work site, and so on. Like, what are some things that are just really key that you want people to know? If you have a whole handbook, you may want to, think about meeting that out over a couple of days. And then finally, sort of that part of that basic orientation is doing office tours and introductions to main people so that they know who does what and who the subject matter experts are, and it helps them to start to build relationships. So those are some of the key things for an orientation. So if we think about a full-on onboarding program, so looking at it as those first 90 days, here's a couple of things that we think are the best practices for that. Well, before we get into that, I want to take a look at this metric that we located. This is from Edison, which is an online training platform. We don't have a relationship with them. We just thought that this survey and this data that they had posted publicly was really, really interesting. So why do you need an onboarding program? So in their results, 35% of US companies spend nothing on onboarding new employees. We hope you're not among them. And these are some of the reasons that they came up with. So 69% of employees choose to stay in the company for up to 3 years as a result of onboarding programs. I think that makes it really obvious why we would want to put something into place. Orientation notwithstanding, the whole onboarding process is what people are looking for. Next, 49% of millennials claim they need a better onboarding process for new hires. And we talk about millennials, I know I kind of feel like from an HR perspective, we focus on them a lot, but I feel like they have a lot of really valid, as a group of people and just as a younger generation of people, to have higher expectations for the companies that they work for and really want to feel connected. And I know that that's something that we talk about when we talk about working with our millennial populations. So I think that's really key. And then finally, 1 year. That's the average that a new employee needs to become fully productive. So we can't assume that somebody starting out with us is going to hit the ground running, although they may, but be fully integrated within just a one-day orientation. So those are some great strengths, promoting sort of the idea for an onboarding program. And then just that pie shape, it says employees quit or consider quitting a new job due to ineffective onboarding. 1 in 6. And that becomes an expensive metric. So we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can as employers to really retain all of our new employees. So to be truly effective, some best practices for creating an onboarding program starts before the first day of employment. So when you've got somebody who has been interviewed, whether it's by a recruiter, by the HR department, or by the hiring manager, likely a combination of the above, that person gets an offer letter, we're already kind of phasing into the onboarding process. It goes well beyond orientation. We kind of discussed what that means. I feel like it requires a lot of frequent feedback, and we're going to go into some methodologies for doing that, for providing that, and to do that on a regular basis, making that a plan and part of that strategy. It involves a lot of relationship building. That's going to help your new hire feel really connected to their team, their manager, and their team, other teams, and anybody with whom they're going to be interacting with. So a really key thing. And then finally, and we'll talk a bit more detail about this, is that utilizing a mentor or buddy program. We feel like this is a really great way to let that employee get like an eye-opening exposure to what the organization looks like. So this person could be somebody on their team. It could be somebody in a similar role, a peer. It could be somebody on a completely different team, depending on the size of the organization. But likely it's somebody who's also an employee, probably not in a manager position, but it's somebody who can guide them and introduce them to the company and all the little ins and outs and what they need to know. That person should be very carefully chosen and should be very aware of what the expectations are for being a buddy. And then be the kind of person that is going to be comfortable reaching out and planning some activities with that person. So I have a couple of questions that I think, we've got 2 slides here. We're going to kind of go through these questions. I really feel like these questions can be used to kind of help create your onboarding strategy. And you're welcome to use them. But these are some of the questions to kind of sit down and talk with your leadership team, with your HR department, your committee in creating this, and kind of come up with a strategy based on the answers to this. So what is the objective of your onboarding program? What are you trying to accomplish? Do you want to improve retention? Do you feel like your turnover is getting too high, that you're losing too many people at the beginning of their careers? And then maybe you have turnovers in different parts of the careers, and people aren't feeling as though they're given enough opportunity for training, for example. So what is your objective? And it may be a multitude. What do new employees need to know about the company and the work environment? What is it that you want to share about your culture, about how you do things, and about just in essence what the elements of the company are that someone's going to need to know? What do you think are the important things to share off the bat and as they get to know you guys? What impression do you want that new employee to have about the company? Do you want them to come across with your professionalism, with your ability to be super laid back? What's that environment look like? And so on. Then we talked a little bit about this before, but what are the key policies and procedures to review? And again, you might want to, spread this out over some time, but in essence, what do you need people to know about your company and about your policies and procedures? So for example, do you have a complicated expense reimbursement policy? And is everybody in a sales position where they might be submitting expense reports? That might be something that you would do straight off. Do you have a accrual-based sick or vacation policy? Is it based on years of service? You want to make sure people really understand what that looks like. And then again, some of the things we talked about in terms of compliance would be around your anti-discrimination, harassment, and retaliation policy, those sorts of things. Anything about sort of your ethics. You might be in a particular industry. I know you guys support a lot of particular specific industries like architecture and engineering, highly technical. Are there some things that you guys as an industry need to share with new hires to make sure that they're compliant with some of the requirements, maybe around contracts or so? And then who would be good mentor and buddy? And really build out that program to make sure that you're assigning a mentor or a buddy to each new hire based on the needs that new hire is going to have, whether it's the department they're in, the role that they fulfill, the types of clients they work with. It may be a multitude of things, but it's a good idea to kind of understand who would make a good buddy and then create a training sort of process for getting those buddies up and running. And then what's the role of your HR department or your HR role, the supervisors or the management team, coworkers and teams, and the buddy? What are those roles going to look like? Who plays a part? Who is going to be taking care of what part of this onboarding process? We really feel like there is a role for all of these types of people. And then kind of moving ahead, what's needed in the work area? We can talk a bit about office needs versus on-site office needs versus remote needs. There's still going to be some requirements about what that workstation looks like. You want it to be comfortable and productive. So there's going to be some things we can talk about between the two. And then what do you want to accomplish in that first day, first week, first month, and that whole onboarding process? What kinds of things do you want to relay to that person? What expectations do you want to set out to make sure that they can meet? I think it's really important to have a really good vision of how you want it to go. And then how are you going to measure that? Metrics are going to be really important. You want to make sure that you're getting a good return on any investments you make. We'll talk a bit about some of the technology, and then we can look at, and then you would want to think about what those costs are going to be and how you want to evaluate whether this has been a successful program. And then finally, obtaining feedback on that program. Also a part of discovering whether or not you're attaining success. So that can be in the form of surveys, and they can be as simple as necessary. They can be done at different parts of the program, or at the period of point where you get to the end of that 90 days. So there's a lot of different options for that.
Okay.
Then I'm going to turn this. Oh, sorry, I'm going to turn this over to Angela, and she's going to kind of walk through some of those best practices for all of these periods of time. Go for it.
Great, thank you, Stacy. So we're going to talk a little bit about some steps and best practices during the hiring process, before the first day, so pre-onboarding, on the first day, first week, and then the first month, and so on. So during the hiring process, I think it's a given that you want your candidate, no matter what, to have an excellent experience. During these remote times, it has been a little bit different. Some of the interviews being done more Zoom or video have been a little bit, I guess, sometimes challenging, sometimes different. But for sure, no matter if you're doing your interview process, let's say remote, the candidate really needs to understand details about the company and the culture, and you really want to set the right expectation about the company. And so maybe during the interview process, sending them links to your website or team bios, or giving them additional company information if this interview process is remote, may be very helpful. I have some clients who have hired new employees, and they've never even seen the office during these times. And so they've really had to kind of share with them what the office is going to look like, or giving them more details to set them up for understanding the company and where they're going to end up working. If you're doing these interviews remote, which is a little bit differently, let's say you're setting it up through like a Zoom call or whatnot, and you're having a panel interview, it's a great opportunity for the candidates to ask a lot of questions to your panel so they can really get to know the company. If you're having these Zoom interviews, I've seen a big miss is that you're having too many people on the panel. So even though a candidate might be kind of a seasoned professional, too many people on a panel interview via Zoom can be a little bit intimidating. So just like a little suggestion might be to maybe have 2 panel interviews if you're going to start that way, so that maybe there's only 4 and then 4. During the next round. Definitely give the candidate kind of an update about what they're going to expect if you're going to have a panel interview like via Zoom or GoToMeeting or something like that, so they know who's going to be on the call, they know what their title is, their positions. Like I said before, maybe even link to their bio so they can kind of get to know who they're going to meet, even though they're not maybe meeting them in person. For sure, if this employee is going to eventually go to the office right away, there's no reason why you can't do this interview, on site. Just make sure that you're telling them about all the really great safety protocols you have in place. Remind them to wear their mask and have it set up if it's going to be in your conference room, so you feel comfortable with this, social distancing. Making sure, like during this interview process now, if their position's going to start off maybe remote and eventually go to the office, make sure you're clear with them on their role. Like, what's their role going to be like if they're working remote at the beginning, and then maybe this summer they're going to the office. So maybe the position's going to change up a little bit, so they don't really, want to have surprises that their job might change once they go back to the office. If you're setting your team up remote right away, maybe share with them some of the compensation they get. At times, some of my clients are giving allowances for workstations or for different technology support that they might need in their workspace at home if they're not going to the office. I think during this remote interview process, people starting off working remote, being clear on work location is very important. If they're going to be working at home, don't take it for granted that they have a designated workspace. So if you're hiring for remote now, make sure that they know what's expected of them with their home office, maybe with their, internet connection or whatnot. One big thing, if it's temporary, if you're hiring them for a few months, they're going to work remote, but this summer they're going to go to the office. Make sure they know that. They're really clear on what the commute is. Because right now, if they're working from home and your office is in Seattle and they live in Everett, that's fine. But if eventually they're going to have to go to the office every day, really kind of think through that whole commute, if they're going to end up having to pay for parking once they go into the office, etc. So the hiring process, getting all those questions with this whole remote age is really important, but it's also key, even if we're not doing this remote, to really have that great experience. They understand their role. They know when they're being hired, what their role is. They're kind of clear on what the compensation is, if there's a bonus or whatnot. This really sets the new hire off on a good foot. So when they're starting on their first day, you know, they know what to expect, and this will really help with the whole entire process. So before the first day, this is the pre-orientation. I think if you're going to be doing this remote, or if they're even coming on site, it's the same thing. While you're talking with them, you're confirming their start date. If they're going to be onboarding and they're going to come do their orientation the first day at your location, you know, you're going to make sure you tell them what to bring. You know, filling out their I-9 or their direct deposit information, you know, who's the point person, where should they park, their dress code, what they need to wear. What about lunch the first day? Are you going to be taking them out? What are those expectations? I've seen a big miss where you have this candidate start. They're kind of unsure of their first day. They finally figure that out. They don't know what to bring. They don't know what to wear. They haven't gotten any of this information. So that's not really starting them off very clear. And it definitely can be done differently so that it's a better experience for them. Then you have that pre-setup. So if they're going to be coming to the office, they have this office space, you have all of those time to anticipate and resolve any obstacles. So you're getting their desk set up, you're getting, you know, all the office supplies ready. Maybe there's a name tag or there's some type of, you know, badge or access card that you need to get them. Maybe they have a physical mailbox on site. So you're doing all that before they even start. You know, a really fun thing to do maybe is even have, you know, your logo information or some little, you know, swag ready for them when they start. So that's if they're going to have that desk right there, their very first day. But if their first day, they might be starting remote, that could change the game a little bit. You're obviously know the first day of what's going to happen, but you're really going to want to make sure that you kind of talk with them beforehand about technology. You know, you're going to find out what they have, what they might need. Don't make assumptions, you know, that they're ready to work remote. You may have, I don't know if you have an IT person or maybe your admin person is your IT person. But a good thing to do maybe is even to schedule a call with the new hire so that they can talk about what they need to have set up at home. What are their technology needs that they need? Also, it might be important to kind of really think about, you know, internet connection and if they need a printer or not. So with that said, you know, you're probably going to want to make sure that either A, you are ordering them equipment that's sent to their house, which I've seen a lot lately, or maybe they're picking it up at a spot beforehand before their first day so that you can kind of handle all those logistics and they're really ready to start that first day. You don't necessarily want their first day to be, they're going to pick up their computer. You know, it would be nice if it was all set up and they're ready to go, especially if they're going to be working from their home office. Making sure that they have an agenda would be great. They know who their first day, who they're going to meet with right away, and how their day is going to look like so that they can plan it. If they're not going to be coming to the office at all, we've seen a big welcome packet being sent that's been very successful, where you have already company swag. You might even print out copies of the handbook or benefit information. Maybe at that point, give them a voucher for Grubhub or whatnot. If you're not going to be able to take them out to lunch, at least they'll have like a certificate that you're treating them to lunch. And maybe at that point on the first day on the agenda is a lunch with their team member or their new manager, and they can virtually, you know, do their lunch together, which is very nice. So no matter what, as I said before, you really want to, before their first day, try to get some of these bits and pieces taken care of and sending them a welcome email, confirming their start date, making sure that they know how much you're looking forward to them starting, giving them an agenda no matter what, you know, even if it's on-site or remote, making sure they kind of know what it's going to look like. One of my clients always gives a handwritten note to all his new hires. And when I look back and chat with them at the end of the week, they just love it. They really love getting this handwritten note with an agenda of their first day from their new manager. We've already talked a little bit about how important it is to coordinate equipment, you know, making sure that you kind of know how their voicemail is going to be, their phone number, their logins, their passwords, getting all that software ready for them. sending an email out to everyone in the office so that they're prepared to welcome the new hire. That's very important. It could be done before the new hire starts. Sometimes I've seen the new hire fill out some type of questionnaire about themselves, get some bio about them so that you're ready to fill out this welcome email so that the new hire was kind of part of giving you information about them, you know, what school they went to or what their background is or their kids or whatnot. So you can really personally get to know them a little bit more. In this remote age, pictures are always nice too. One of my clients gets some pictures of the new hire with their dog, and it's been really nice so that you can really get to know the employee. In addition, your website probably has your team and their pictures, and maybe not, but if they do, as I mentioned during the interview process, that's nice that candidates see it. If you didn't do it then, maybe before the new hire starts, you can kind of send them a link to the team so that they can kind of get acquainted with that. Stacy she talked a lot about the mentor buddy, but kind of figuring out who is the mentor buddy. If you go that route, you know, have a training program for the mentor buddy so that they know what is their responsibility. Is it a 15-minute touch base each week, or is it a little bit more than that at the beginning, which is usually what I see. And then, of course, the agenda is not just on you. If you're the HR person or admin person that kind of handles orientation, do know that as Stacy was going through all those things to think about, onboarding is a whole process and it's a team effort. So you're going to want to work with the managers and other departments and see what role they're going to have in this whole entire process. Having a checklist is great. You'll probably want a checklist maybe from all stages, from pre-onboarding throughout the first day, what type of paperwork you're going to want completed, and then going through all the training to make sure that you're going over everything with the new hire to set them up for success. And also the point people know what role they have in the process. So sometimes there's like a spreadsheet I see, or some of your programs that you might have assigned people for each area, and then you're checking it off, and it's a really smooth process for everybody. All right, so before the first day, so we've already talked about having, you know, an outline or an agenda so that you kind of know how the first week's gonna be done. So blocking things off on calendars is nice. If you're going to have managers involved or leadership, have it already blocked on your calendar. You know, Tuesday from, 2 to 3, the new hire is going to meet with the marketing team or the finance team, and already kind of have that blocked out so people are prepared. We're going to talk a little bit more about the new hire paperwork. Remote can be a little bit different. But if you're doing it remote, and even if you're doing it that day in the office, you could utilize your payroll software or your HRIS system to make it faster and smoother, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But if you are doing it remote, making sure that you're sending all of the information to the new hire, they kind of know all the different documents and links to get them, so that day when they're filling it out, they know how to access it and what they need to fill out and complete. You're going to be reviewing the handbook and the benefits and the policies and procedures, but it's also important for the new hire to know where they can find that moving forward. Do you have some shared drive or some intranet site? That would be really important. I know Stacy talked about what those policies and procedures that you're going to talk about, maybe your first day and then throughout the week, so you don't inundate them with so much, especially if you're doing this remote. Let's face it, it's a lot of information to grasp at once. So you're probably going to want to break it down into bits and pieces. You can talk about, anti-harassment and discrimination. You can talk about your violence-free workplace, your social media policy, your benefits and whatnot. But making sure to have those coffee and lunch breaks while you're doing this remote would be very important. So maybe that coffee break, it's going to be on the agenda. It's going to be 15 minutes, maybe with just a coworker, or maybe it's the time that the employee has on their own, and scheduling that lunch break so that they, know when to take it that day, who they're going to be with would really be helpful so that they can start that relationship building. That first day, would the lunch break be a virtual welcome celebration? Maybe the coffee break's a virtual welcome celebration. It's really important that if they're doing this remote, you're going to have to help them build their network. So you're going to have to help with email introductions, because at that point, you know, you might give them an org chart, but it would be helpful if you're starting to do those introductions. You're scheduling and setting up some one-on-ones with them if they're remote. You really are checking with the buddy, making sure the buddy's checking in with them. You're trying to do anything and everything to help them feel those connections. If they're going to be on site, you know, that office tour is great and they get a feel for everything. But if they're not, if they're at home, it's important that they kind of know how things go in your office. Like, what are the communication methods? Some of you might have certain apps or programs that everybody uses. What's the lingo? Maybe there's some industry specific lingo that you guys use. How can they look and see people's schedules and availabilities and look at the company calendar so that they, know what's going on, and they can feel like they understand the protocols taking place in the office, even if they're not there physically. Safety is important. I mean, safety is going to be different if they're on site. Obviously, you're going to go through your normal safety orientation with them. You know, where's the emergency exits, and where's the first aid kit, and where's the fire extinguishers. But if they're in their home office, there's a certain sense of safety there too. Their office has to be safe. They don't want wires, and you really want to stress that wires they might trip over. So you really want to also go over the safety protocols as they are working from home as well. Now, if they're going into the office sometimes and working from home sometimes, COVID is key, right? So you're going to really stress your COVID protocols with them and overstress those COVID protocols with them. As far as the phone and voicemail, if they're working from home, it's an interesting one that I had. It took a couple hours with a new hire of how the phone calls are going to be transferred to their cell phone. And they were trying to figure all these logistics, and it was very complicated. And it didn't have to be, because we could have handled that maybe more of the pre onboarding. The calls go to their cell phone. And if they're in the office, even just figuring out how to listen to their messages could take, a good 20 minutes of training with them. We already talked a little bit about the computer, but this is the day on the first day that they're really going to figure out the computer, the login, how to create their passwords, what's their, email accounts and the email signature. Now, if they're working from home, what's the best way to get this information to them? Can you share your screen and kind of show them how to set it up? Have you already created some videos or tutorials that can help them? So that's the time that you don't want to spend hours with these misses. You really want to kind of have a good detailed plan with them. So having that checklist of making sure that they kind of know how to set these up will help them so that they can get started right away. And then if they're having issues with their IT, making sure they know who's the point person, who should I go to with questions to help if there's issues. The next one is just incorporating fresh and engaging ideas, being very creative. So some companies have a really fun scavenger hunt, maybe their first day, where they kind of have to figure out people within the organization, or, as you're teaching them information, then they answer questions at the end, and it's kind of fun. Maybe that's the day, that if you have some type of virtual welcome celebration, you can kind of have a little bit of a team building activity or a get to know you game. That's really fun. So for sure, when you're thinking about the first day, survey them at the end, see where they're at. If they're home, it could be a very long day if they're not used to being in front of the screen all day. It can be very exhausting. So, think about your format, maybe smaller segments with breaks, bits and pieces. Maybe you're not going to get everything done the first day that you want. So we talked about new hire paperwork, and I think you all are all familiar with, that new hire paperwork, which is just a portion of the orientation and just a very small portion of onboarding. But what does it all entail? Obviously before they start, you should probably have their resume and their references and their background check all done, and you have the offer letter all done. But on their first day, what else are they going to complete? They'll probably have the job description that sometime they'll review. The new official new hire paperwork probably has their W-4 and their I-9 and direct deposit and input sheet, maybe with their in case of emergency. If they're going to be on site, they might get their key card. You're going to have information about proof of health insurance coverage. If they're getting equipment, you know, if it's a laptop or anything else, they're going to be signing off on it. Maybe some type of confidentiality and NDA, or even a non-compete that you might have done during the offer process. The handbook acknowledgement, and a lot of times you're having maybe a checkbox that they're completing that they've reviewed their anti-harassment and anti-discrimination policy. You may have had some type of application or arbitration agreement during the offer process, and other specific information internally that you want them to complete. In Washington, you know, making sure that they know about the paid sick and safe leave, and in Seattle, there's all the other different notices that you may use. I know the group here might also have other states that you support, so there might be specific paperwork that you have to have them complete. One thing about paperwork is, in our minds with the I-9 form, it's important that we're usually seeing those copies of the identifications, and we are trained to know that we have to see the physical forms of identification. So if it's at all possible, it's really nice to do this the paperwork process in person so you can see the documents. Now, during the COVID times, it kind of eased up. If you're operating remote, the United States Citizen and Immigration Services said that you could defer the physical presence of looking at these documents until you were back to operating in person. So now we're kind of getting, I'm not going to say we're at the end of this, but I think that there's things that are opening up. And right now, they've only said, if you look online, they only are allowing this to take place through the end of this month. So that might change up a little bit. We don't know. As we know, things keep getting extended. But as of now, until the end of this month, if you're operating remote, you can see those documents through the video link, or you can fax, your new hire can fax you the copies of the IDs or whatnot. But if you are doing this remote, you do have to fill out the I-9 a specific way. So if you're not seeing the physical documents when you're filling out the I-9, you actually need to put COVID-19 as a reason for not seeing the physical inspections in section 2 in the additional information field. Now the caveat is once you're operating in person again, you do need to still see those physical IDs, just like you always have. They just put this like little clause during these times to make it easier for employers. So once you're operating normally and your employees are back in the office, you're going to want to go back to them and ask them to bring the documents. And then you're going to actually put in section 2, documents physically examined, and put the date. So even if during this year you haven't physically seen these documents, make sure when you're back in the office, you're going to want to physically see the documents and update the I-9s accordingly. If you have any questions about that, I know that's a lot to kind of grasp in one little sitting, but please, reach out and we can kind of share a little bit more about how you can do that later. So new hire paperwork is an important part of the process. And it's a little different during remote, like I said. Some of my clients actually have mailed all this new hire paperwork to the employee with a return, envelope that they're mailing it all back. The problem is if there's a missed date or if there's missed information, that can be a little tricky. Sometimes you're highlighting everything that they need to fill out so that they're mailing back and you don't have those issues. You could be sending them, the template, like I had mentioned, with a rundown of all the information they need, and they can fill it out, but making sure that it's secure. And so if they're sending it back to you that way, they really need to make sure that they password protect it, maybe zip it with the password. So when they're sending back anything that has their social security number, any protected information, that they feel like it's secure during that process. Now, another way of doing this is if you have a great payroll system, and a lot of them, you might not realize offer this, but you could use, if you have ADP or Paychex or Pay Northwest, they have a whole onboarding module that helps you collect all the new hire paperwork in a very fast manner. Maybe it's not your payroll system, but you have an HRIS system, such as Bamboo or Zenefits. And that can be really helpful. And they'll help you make sure you get all the paperwork. They have links and portals that the employees can get their handbook and they sign off on it. And they're making sure that they're filling out all their paperwork and getting it back in a secured manner through their platform. The benefits portion is key. Maybe benefits, you're getting them all this paperwork, maybe their first day, but they're not effective until like the first of the month following 60 days. So you're giving them time to review it, and then you're going to check back with them in a couple of weeks for this paperwork. Your benefit broker probably also has a portal right now that's helping get this information. And so, look into it if you're not already using their platforms. Maybe they're not, and you're still doing it where you're filling it out, password protecting it, and sending it in. But that's something that you could kind of look into. Any of these portals are available, and if you want more information about any of them at all, I just looked at a question about the camera. Well, anyway, we'll go back to questions. I keep seeing questions pop up, and I want you to know we will handle all your questions at the end. But there's so many of them, I'm like, oh, I want to answer this right away, but we'll save them for the very end. So, but thank you for sending us some questions in. So the paperwork can get a little tricky, but it doesn't have to be the whole day. It doesn't have to be hours and hours. If you are having a good plan, you have your checklist, you have all the paperwork given to them, it can be very smooth. Now, this is very important for you to remember. When they're filling out their paperwork, no matter what time they're filling it out, it is payable time for them. So you're going to want to make sure that new hires are getting paid for filling out their new hire paperwork. All right, so best practices for the first week. Making training real is important. And so having that agenda, especially if they're at home, and making sure they know their training plan for the week. So are they going to be shadowing meetings and calls? Are they going to maybe be participating in some of the debriefs or brainstorming sessions? Maybe training is reviewing documents or websites or external communication. Who are they going to partner with to learn, a software system? So make sure that it's real during that week. I think even during the interview process and during that first day, they're really getting to know your company. That's why they joined you, right? But really being very clear on your mission, your values. Hopefully your values are either listed in your handbook. Some people have documents, some people have values as part of a team building exercise. But during that first week, they're really getting to know the history, the vision, mission, values. They're getting a feel for the org. They're understanding what the company's goals are and their departmental goals. And then they also kind of tie that into how are they involved? What are their individual goals that will align to achieve the department goals? So this is the time your manager's really sitting down with them so that they know, what is their impact and what are their goals and objectives. And then during that week, the bits and pieces that you're really sitting with them with your checklist, and you're making sure they kind of are covering all the different policies and procedures and company information, things that you kind of take for granted if you've been an employee for a long time, such as, how to order supplies. If you're home, how can you order supplies? And even if you're on site, who's the go-to person for them? When should they take their break and meal period? How should they, request time off? The inclement weather policy, something that's a big miss until it happens. There's a big storm, and then at All Things HR, we get about 50 calls to update the inclement weather policy. But this is the time you share with them, if they can't come to work for some reason, what do they do? How do they clock in and out? What does an open door policy mean at your organization? What truly is the dress code? I've seen the dress code be a miss, and it's really clear that you can't wear jeans except on Friday, and the employee wore jeans on Thursday, and they felt like an outcast. And it's like, well, that's the time during the week you really share with them, the dress code and expectations, how schedules or technology use, or who to go to if they have payroll concerns. As I mentioned before, your own company, lingo or acronyms, or the subject matter expert in different areas. So at that point, you're using that checklist. You're trying not to overwhelm them, even though this all sounds very overwhelming, right? But I think during that week, they're kind of really getting a feel for how they're going to be reviewed as far as their performance is concerned. So if you're doing this onboarding, so you're doing some checkpoints, and some of them are going to be informal and some of them are going to be formal. But I think you're thinking as you're creating your program, if you're going to document performance. So at 30 days, will you be documenting their performance? At 90 days, will you be documenting it and will be put in their performance personnel file? It's interesting. I've seen a new hire start and the managers called me up after about 6 months and they said, oh, I knew right away on 30 days they weren't going to make it. I'm like, well, did you document it? No, I was just going to see if it got better. But I think at this point, you're 30, 60, 90 days, you're documenting it. So you have this trail. If you're meeting with them and you're kind of telling them expectations and they're not meeting with it, give them that feedback. You're talking with them about how they can be trained, what online resources are available. You know, they're kind of getting a feel for the org chart, so they're understanding what their advancement opportunities will be like. You know, being proactive with your wellness programs. If you have an EAP, that's the time to share it with them. If you have teledoc services, share that with them. You know, maybe you're starting to do stretching in the morning, you know, get them part of that right away. And then just, you know, having other employees proactively send them emails or highs is always nice, because relationship building, whether you're remote or on site, is so important. Engagement, you know, relationship building during the onboarding process really helps set them up for success. And then, you know, continuing to survey, you know, checkpoints, seeing if they have any questions and trying to, you know, kind of provide them the resources that they need. So this is ongoing. You're keeping that momentum going during, you know, the first 90 days, you know, being very specific about these, you know, meetings. You know, if you have a weekly staff meeting, making sure they're invited, making sure that, you know, we talked a little today before we started this call about face-to-face meeting, and some people could have their video on and some people, you know, can't because maybe, you know, internet connection or whatnot. But maybe there's times if you put your video on right away with a new hire, they will. And I see that being very successful, so that they can actually see you and feel comfortable that putting your video on, if they're working remote, is okay. I think definitely, you know, being part of these regularly scheduled staff meetings and events, get them to feel engaged right away. You're encouraging questions. I definitely think at the very beginning, when you're working with them on their first day, tell them, you know, put all these questions down, and when we meet on our one-on-ones, you know, I can start, you know, answering them for you. One of my clients, they have a logo notebook. And when they start, they put a little sticky on the notebook and they said, this book is your book to use for all your questions that we'll review during your one-on-ones. And it's just kind of cute. And that's, you know, a place that these new hires really do put their questions and bring the book with them when they have their one-on-ones, and it's a big success. I definitely think the feedback is so important. You know, give them praise, let them know they're doing well during, you know, these first 30, 60, 90 days, but for sure, give them feedback on things they can work on. You're going to stay focused with the plan, you know, stay focused knowing that they're not going to be trained the first day. It's going to take them time. Like Stacy said earlier, it could be a whole year, you know, bits and pieces. You know, and set the right expectation for yourself as well as your new hire, so that they don't get frustrated, you know. And they, especially if they're being trained remote, you know, maybe figure out how they best learn. You know, is it going to be reading first and then shadowing and then doing? You know, I guess that would be something that you could tackle, and it would be easier to have a training plan for them. At this point, you know, maybe it's like 60 days, that benefit paperwork, I've seen that amiss, you know, and from the new hire paperwork, making sure you get that timely to payroll or whoever needs it so your employee gets paid on time, to the benefit paperwork, that's really important. So this might be the time that you're figuring out, you know, what they need to upload already to the portal or give it to you, so that when they're effective for their health insurance or, you know, their dental or vision, that it's all in the system and they kind of know how to access it and they've gotten all that information, and you're not kind of backpedaling it to kind of retro back or whatnot. And then again, you can't stress it enough to have these formal and informal check-ins, you know, document as needed. All right. Well, I gave you a lot of information to kind of noodle over. I'm sure a lot of that you're already doing. I think Stacy's going to kind of sum up some things that I talked about, especially for the remote employees that you're onboarding. Stacy, you're muted still.
Thanks. So Angela provided a ton of great information. And as you develop your strategy for onboarding, you're probably going to pick and choose what's going to work for your particular company, your culture, and so on. And so don't feel like all of these things need to be incorporated. You're going to figure out what's going to work for you guys. Some of the key tips is number one is that pre-orientation planning. I think that's really one of the key ways to make an employee feel welcomed from the very beginning. And some of those items that Angela talked about and that I talked about are going to be a really key way to do that. Setting those expectations and putting together a formal agenda. An agenda can be a combination of things. It might be a full-on plan for the whole onboarding process. It might be something that takes a full 90 days, for example, to accomplish. And then you're maybe getting signatures or checkoffs or dates of completion along the way. And maybe that's something that the HR department monitors and maintains, but shares with the employee and the managers as it goes through. Your equipment delivery and pickup, whatever that looks like, getting that workstation set up is super key. There's no worse way to make an employee feel like they're not being welcomed is to not have that technology ready for them. Putting together some kind of welcome packet, it can be super simple. It can really be a conglomeration of things. It can be the collection of paperwork on that agenda. So it can be super simple, or it can involve all kinds of fun stuff as well if you've got that kind of stuff on site. Getting that new hire paperwork done. It's just a key thing to get in and out of the way that first day, especially around some of the things that make sure people get paid and benefits and are ready to work. Getting that buddy set up and making sure that they're introduced to them and then handing them off to their manager. When we're on site, it's great to be able to do just a physical, I've done that for many years, a physical handoff. But we're remote, maybe it might be sort of inviting the manager to join at the tail end of your orientation and saying, okay, we're good to go, here you go, and really literally handing them off. Making sure that your manager and your buddies and teams understand what their role is going to be. It's reiterating what we kind of talked about at the beginning, but I think it's really important that managers understand the role that they're going to play, that it's important, and that it entails more than just giving them tasks, that there's a lot of things that they can do to really make that person feel welcome. And then making sure that they know about any ongoing social events, those staff meetings, the all staff meetings, whether they're departmental, if you've got a way to, if you guys are doing holiday parties and picnics, what has that been replaced with in the remote days? And then what are you doing moving forward for that? And then is there some ongoing training? This may be training for getting them up and running. I know this stuff may not apply to most of you guys, but if you've got folks that are in the medical profession, do they get HIPAA training? Is there bloodborne pathogen training? Something more appropriate might be annual anti-discrimination training. That's something that we really push for all of our clients. So that might be something that's planned for all clients, or sorry, for all employees, including your new hire. And then some best practices, just to kind of reiterate, for that positive onboarding experience. Again, starts before the first day of employment. It goes well beyond our orientation, requires frequent feedback. And I think that's a really key thing, making sure that there's a lot of contact and somebody doesn't feel like they've just really been let go to swim by themselves. And it involves the relationship building and positive interactions. I think that's a key thing. It's kind of up to us, the employers, to help that person build those networks. Once they're off and running, they can take it from there. Utilizing that buddy system, I think we've talked about that quite a bit, and then surveying the employees through the onboarding process. And really the purpose of that is to help you fine tune your program and to find out whether or not it's making sense.
Perfect. Sorry, I was starting to look at questions.
Oh yeah, I think we're getting ready for that. I'm just going to close out and then we can start to look at those. So really, companies that execute a structured, comprehensive, engaging onboarding process are more likely to attract and keep the best talent. So really what you're doing here is extending your whole recruiting and retention plan to involve a really structured strategy for onboarding. And so when you're bringing somebody on, you start with recruiting, you segue into onboarding, and at some point that segues into your ongoing retention strategy for all of your staff. And I think you'll find that that's going to make a really clear avenue for about improving your retention. So I think that is it. We did have a number of comments and questions. I can start to go through this. I loved all of your comments, you guys. I started to reply, but then it just became, I think I'm just going to get sidetracked. So let's see. Someone commented that they liked what impression question being on the list of questions to consider. True. I think it's a great point. What impression you're trying to present to all of those. I think it's a really key thing to think about. Carrie mentioned she agreed it's too easy to fall into the get the paperwork done track, lose sight of the bigger reason for onboarding. True, absolutely. So somebody asked if our firm is helping companies with actual virtual onboarding. If we're hearing or companies are hearing what the employee thinks about virtual onboarding, pros and cons. Great question. As for the first part, I think most of us now have clients for whom we are definitely assisting with onboarding. I have 3 right now where I'm doing different types and levels of onboarding. In my experience, they've been very receptive to that and appreciate the fact that somebody is really trying to think about it from a different perspective from virtual versus in person, particularly if they really are almost 100% working on at home. Angela, have you had any experiences regarding or anything to add about whether our services?
Oh, yes, we can definitely help with virtual onboarding. I have several clients. I also help with virtual onboarding. So yeah, at the end, I'll give you our phone number and website and all that, and you can reach out to us.
Great. Yeah, like Carol mentioned, your onboarding was pretty much, here's the paperwork, get it back to me, nothing warm and fuzzy. Warm and fuzzy is great. It just makes sense for your culture, but I agree, Carol, that just handing out paperwork and then that's the end of orientation, go, is not really going to make for a successful feeling about your company. EL commented, my company tries to reflect in-office experience as much as possible. We provide first day lunch with welcome ambassador, and we still do this over Teams. Fantastic. Perfect
I love
solution.
it. Yeah,
I do too. Andrew mentioned the biggest challenge is regular follow-up with a new employee during the onboarding process. So true. It's easy to forget that they are new, even after a couple of weeks. He mentions that he always took new employees out to coffee after they'd been there with the firm for a couple of weeks and to check in on their first day, paperwork, usually benefit questions, true, and see how things are going. Perfect. Just building on things like that.
Yeah, and the checklist might help you kind of follow up with those. So if you have a good onboarding checklist, I think that might be key for you to not forget to follow up with some of those items.
Yep. Yep. Another comment about going out to lunch the first day, being able to figure out a way to do that remotely, whether it's like Angela mentioned, sending vouchers or getting something delivered to them. That might be a fun way to do that. And then Carrie asked, how are companies handling liability for company equipment that they'll be using at home? Great question. Typically, I think companies will construct some kind of an equipment agreement that delineates exactly what equipment's been checked out, for example. It doesn't have to be a legal document. It can be sort of I understand that I've received this equipment and I will return it as new condition, or however you want to do that. And if there are, things that happen over the course of regular work where they need to have things repaired, have a process for that. Angela, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I agree. Having them fill out a form that they received it. Mm-hmm.
I'm working with a client right now that is trying to come up with some sort of a plan for repairs for accidents that might not happen at work on site. So for example, your cat spilled your coffee onto your keyboard. That probably wouldn't happen in the office, but you might spill your coffee on the keyboard. So it's like, okay, is this something that would happen under normal work circumstances and we would cover it and get that repaired? Or is it something where it's like, okay, you lent the laptop to your kids so they could play games and they dropped it and broke it. So maybe we split a cost. So there's different ways you can address it depending upon kind of what that workstation looks like from home and what you want to cover. Somebody else commenting on the coffee, touch base, great. Yep, it's true. Gives the opportunity to answer questions. Lene commented, we have an asset tracking system and have an employee sign an agreement to take care of the equipment and return policy. Perfect. Yeah, I mean, that might be something that Lene would be willing to share with somebody else who had a question. I think that's a great idea. Suggestion to log in, make sure that the logins work. Yes, we've all had technical difficulties. Great point. If maybe the person doing the orientation and the IT person should maybe do a mock-up or get that person to do their login the very first thing, then those issues can be addressed during the orientation piece. Here's someone commented, let's see, Shannon, we set up a series of town hall meetings from our executive team and recorded them for later viewing by our summer interns. You can send them invitations, they can view them. This is great. This gives them an intro to the firm, different areas of expertise, senior leadership, and then they can ask questions live. Employees joining later can view the recorded sessions. New employees appreciate the outreach with the A-team. That's great. I love that. Shannon also commented about the I-9s. You've had people hold them up in front of the camera, then take a picture of them and send them to HR. That's exactly what I've been doing. So they hold them up. You can say, okay, to the best of my ability, that looks like a real document to me. Can you take a good picture or stick it on your printer scanner and send that over to me? And then you can go ahead and fill out your I-9 with that. Perfect. That's a perfect solution for kind of our interim.
Yeah. And just make sure to, when you're back to the office, to ask them to bring the documents, and then you can update the I-9 that you physically saw them after.
Correct. And remember to be consistent. So especially with I-9s, if you're collecting photographs, pictures, copies of their documentation, do it for everybody. So you don't want to have, some people have some documentation with photos and some do not. You want to just make sure everybody has it so that you're showing that your compliance is consistent and there's no discrimination issues. Andrew commented, we've been letting employees expense supplies during all of this. No one has really gone out of control with the spending, and office supplies are still lower than pre-pandemic. It's true. If you have a nice supply cupboard and you go and grab Post-its every time, or somebody comes into your office and always steals your favorite black pen, not that that's ever happened to me, then you spend more money. But you're right, when you're at home, it's probably all contained. And other than having kids that might be using some of your supplies, people are probably being a lot more reticent about spending money. Great solution. Let's see, liking the logo notebook? Oh, is that a platform? Is Jody still online?
No, it was the example of my client gives a logo notebook and asks the new hires to keep track of their questions.
Gotcha, perfect, I love it. Asset Tiger, that must be for tracking equipment. Good suggestion. Let's see, documents have to be kept on paper or is digital? Okay, that's a great question. For the most part, if you want to create electronic personnel files, that's fine, as long as it's got the same things in it that you would have in a paper file. The exception, typically, pre-COVID, was that we were still recommending employers to keep paper copies of their I-9s, because during any kind of an audit, even though the website, the U.S. Citizenship Integration site might say, an electronic file is fine, they sometimes come back and say, oh, but we don't feel like you have the right firewall or the right protections, or it's not password protected, or it doesn't have the right privacy. And so for that reason, we usually recommend employers keep paper copies. COVID, that's going to be a lot more difficult. Again, it's going to be when we're back in the office being able to create some kind of a document storage for that. I think that a lot of those more advanced payroll companies that are doing document storage for you, I was talking with a client just the other day, I want to say they were using one of the payroll, either Paylocity or Pay Northwest, where they took on the liability for doing the e-verify of the I-9. So that kind of gave the employer a little bit of comfort knowing that the electronic copy of the I-9 was kept according to guidelines that would meet those requirements. But that being the only thing, everything else, and Angela, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but most everything can be kept electronically.
Yeah, and just like with your paper files, if you keep paper files, we say keep them under 2 lock and key, you know, so you have like a filing cabinet behind a door. If you're doing electronic files, just make sure it's in a secure network, obviously. It's a given, but we like to say that and stress it.
All right. Any other questions? If anybody has anything more, be sure to pop them through. And Angela's going to take a couple seconds to just kind of give you a little bit of background on us.
Well, I realized I looked at the time. We've been having so much fun. We have gone a little bit over. So thank you so much for your time today. But I did want to share with you, and you're going to get the slide deck, but we do have free webinars. We've been doing this for about a year now. It started off, we were giving COVID updates, and it led into time to give you some helpful HR tips. And so kind of each month we take on a new topic. And at the very beginning of our Wednesday morning HR, we usually share about 15-20 minutes of COVID updates that might affect you in the workplace. And then we take on another topic. So here's a list of our upcoming webinars. If you are in need of SHRM certifications, if you're an HR professional, they do count. They're approved for SHRM recertification credits. But what you need to do, if you go to our website, you can register. And if there's any questions you have before any of these seminars, you know, please feel free to ask them and we can address them. And we have a chat feature too. We use GoToWebinar, so you can ask them during these free webinar sessions. And then probably a couple of months ago, we started some deep dive webinars. We realized that when we did these Wednesday mornings, we tackled the topic just bit, and now we're kind of taking some of the topics and we're elaborating them a little bit more. So here's our list. This Friday, our DEI consultant, her name is Jasmine, and she's going to really deep dive DEI in what it is and, you know, what it means in your workplace, and give you some, you know, some strategies, and she's great. So I encourage you, if you have time on Friday from 8 to 9, register to, you know, be a part of our deep dive into DEI with Jasmine, and then you can kind of see the topics in, you know, April, May, June. We are here as HR consultants for our clients. We have a help desk Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. If you want to be one of our clients, you know, please feel free to reach out. You can talk to our client service specialist, and she can share with you some of our other services. We do help our clients with HR audits. We do employee handbooks. We help with employee relations, documents, anti-harassment training, manager training, you know, everything HR related. You know, we've done third-party investigations. We do some recruiting, you know, so if you're interested in learning more and seeing how we can help your company, please feel free to reach out. We are on Facebook, we're on LinkedIn, and here at the very end is our website again and our telephone number. So thank you so much for letting us present to you today.
Thank you so much, Stacy and Angela. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. All right, I'm going to stop the recording.